So I'll begin. So thanks for coming. My name is Joan Flanagan and I work in the European Commission office in Dublin, which is based in Dawson Street. It's the European Commission representation in Ireland. And part of the role of our office is to provide information to people about career opportunities in the EU institutions. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I suppose, delivering the message of an organisation called EPSO. EPSO is the European Personnel Selection Office, and it's an umbrella organisation that's responsible for selection of candidates for recruitment by the EU institutions. And it can be the European Commission or the European Parliament or the Council of the European Union or any of the EU institutions. They all work with EPSO. So EPSO has a website, you can see it there, eu-careers.eu, and they also have a good presence online and on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and also on YouTube. That's something important to point out. They have a lot of good video clips that you can watch on YouTube that give you an insight into the types of careers that are available and the day-to-day tasks involved in those career opportunities. So I would recommend their YouTube channel, but to kind of emphasize, I mean, during the presentation I'm going to mention a lot of different websites, but I suppose the gospel is the EPSO website. So that's the most important website, because those are the people that organise the recruitment and the selection process. So eu-careers.eu is the main one to remember. So as I said, EPSO organise competitions throughout the year. They're called competitions. They're similar to the type of procedures used by the Irish Civil Service. They're open competitions that consist of a series of exams. I'm going to go into that in more detail in a few seconds. But they happen at different times of the year. So in spring, round about now, they have competitions running for university graduates, people who would start working as senior officials in the EU institutions. Usually you begin at the kind of graduate entry grade, and then you work your way up the career ladder. Then in the summer they look for linguists, people to work as translators and interpreters. Those competitions are usually published on their website in July, around about July. And then in December they recruit people, or they select people to work as secretarial assistants, people who provide support to other members of staff within the institutions. And then from time to time during the year, they also look for people who have very specialised skills, like scientists or architects, forensics experts. There's a huge range, child care specialists. Really, it can be anything. So people who have very defined specialist skills. But the main cycle of competitions is spring for the administrator graduate positions, then summer for translators, interpreters, and then winter for assistants. Now, because it is spring, I'm going to talk mainly about the first of those options, the positions available for university graduates to work as administrators. So at the moment, for about 24 more hours, there is a competition open through EPSO for administrators. Administrator is the name of the category of staff, of people who work as senior officials within the institutions. I always think that in English it sounds a bit confusing, because when we talk about administrators, we usually talk about people who do admin in an office, whereas in the EU institutions, I think it might be a translation of a French phrase. It means people who are officials, policy officers. So it's just a broad title for a category of staff who are senior officials. So they have different grades beginning at 85, and then you work your way up the ladder to 86, 87, 88, and so on as your career progresses. But normally when they have an open competition like this, it's to recruit people at the entry grade level. So this is for graduates who don't have any experience necessarily. The application deadline is actually tomorrow, and it's at 12 noon Brussels time. Now, to be honest, I mean, you could of course apply, but it does take quite a long time to get your application processed, and you are advised not to leave it until the last minute. So maybe it's a little bit late to be telling you about this competition, but just to inform you that this happens every year. So it'll come up again next year around the same time. It'll be advertised around St. Patrick's Day, and you'll have a month to apply online, and so on every year. They have this annual cycle. It's open to people from each one of the EU member states. So there are 28 member states at the moment. Croatia is the latest, the one that joined last year. And you can apply for this competition. You could apply as a graduate in any discipline. You can have a degree in any discipline. It doesn't have to be EU related or politics related. It can be really anything at all. And most of the jobs would be based in Brussels, because that's kind of where most of the EU institutions are based. Now, there is another competition open at the moment as well. This is also at AD5 level. So it's the same level, but it's for people who would work as auditors in the EU institutions. Most of these jobs are based in Luxembourg, and you also have to have a degree to apply, but it can be in any of these disciplines. So it's quite broad, but it is specified which kind of areas that you need to be a graduate in. And like the previous competition, if you're in your final year in college, you can still apply as long as you have your degree by the end of July. And the deadline for this competition isn't until next week, so you still have plenty of time to get the application done. Now, I'm going to talk now about kind of what the application involves and what the whole process involves in different steps. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Well, first of all, to apply, one of the prerequisites, as well as being a citizen of one of the EU member states, you have to speak or have 2 of the 24 official EU languages. So there are 24 official EU languages, including Irish. You need to have 2 of them to apply, and there's a bit of a trick, because your second language has to be either English, French, or German. Now, that's for the purpose of applying for the competition. You have to have a main language and a second language, and that will become more clear in a second when I explain how the competition works. But so 1 language plus either English, French, or German. So for example, in theory, as an Irish person, you could apply with Irish as your first language and English as your second language. Okay, now moving on. How does it work? It's a 9-month process, roughly, from start to finish. So you apply online, you set up this profile on the EPSO website. That itself is a fairly lengthy procedure. It takes quite a long time, because you have to put in a lot of detail about your qualifications and your personal details, and you have to input a lot of different data. So it's not something that you can just do in a few minutes, and that's why they always recommend that you don't leave it until the last minute to apply, because often the EPSO website gets overloaded during the last 24 hours. So at the moment, for the one where the deadline is tomorrow, it's going to be quite heavy traffic to the EPSO website. So they say give yourself plenty of time and make sure that you have all of your information near you, and you can save your application and come back to it if you need to go off and get various bits and pieces of material to put into your application. So once you apply for the competition on the EPSO website, once you fill in your registration, you're then invited to sit some computer-based tests. If you're successful in that round of the competition, the computer-based tests, and if you're in the top percentage of people who pass those tests. You're then invited to go through to a second round in Brussels, and that's an assessment centre. It's a day-long assessment in Brussels, various types of tests, and again I'll go into more detail on that. And then if you're successful in that round, and if you're in the top percentage of people who pass that round, you then go through to a reserve list. Your name is placed on a list of successful candidates, and that list is usually valid for 1 year, and you can be recruited from the list. So just to go into those steps in more detail, the computer-based tests. I always think, or I always tell people, that this is a bit like doing your driver theory test, because you choose a test centre. That's the first thing that you have to do. You can sit those tests anywhere in the world, and there are lots of test centres all over the European Union. So usually the competition deadline, let's say the one where it closes tomorrow, the computer-based tests will be a few months after that. So you might think, okay, I'm not going to be in Ireland at that time, I'm going to be in Spain, or I'm going to be in Germany. Then you can choose a test centre there and sit your tests there. The tests, there are 4 different types: verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning, and then situation judgment. The first 3 of those you do in your first language, your main language. And the 4th one, situation judgment as they call it, is in your second language. Now, I don't know if you've seen these types of tests before. You can find samples, well, there are samples on the EPSO website, and also from career services and universities. Even, I remember when I was in secondary school, you could find a lot of examples of these types of questions. But to briefly explain, verbal reasoning is usually a paragraph, a text that you have to read, and then you've got 4 questions, and it's a multiple choice exam where you have to choose which of the 4 statements or questions is correct, based on the text that you've read. Then numerical reasoning is kind of similar, except that instead of a text you've got some kind of a graph or a mathematical problem that you have to look at, and then you've got 4 statements and you have to choose which one is right. And then abstract reasoning is the one that's a bit trickier. It's a series of diagrams or pictures, and you have to choose the next picture or next diagram in a sequence. So it's all about logic and examining how your brain works, and I find that one most difficult. The 4th one, situation judgment, it gives you a text about a workplace scenario. So let's say it tells you, okay, you're in the office, it's 7 o'clock, you want to go home, but your boss walks in with lots of extra work and it's very urgent. What do you do? And you've got a series of possibilities, possible courses of action that you could follow, and you have to say which one is the most effective course of action, which one is the least effective course of action. And this is really examining how you interact with colleagues, how you prioritise work, how you organise yourself in the workplace. And you have a lot of dilemmas, excuse me, a lot of dilemmas and workplace kind of problems to solve. And again, that's one of the computer-based tests. And that's something that's used also by the Irish Civil Service. They call it job simulation, where they give you these workplace scenarios and you have to try to resolve them. Okay, so moving on. If you're successful in the computer-based tests, and again, it is a competition, and this is something that my boss always emphasises, it's competitive, that's why it's called a competition. It's not just good enough to pass the computer-based tests, you have to be in the top percentage of people who get through. Then you go through to this assessment centre phase, and this is normally in Brussels, and you've got various types of tests in your second language. So you have a group exercise, a case study, an interview, and a presentation. And you can find a very useful video, again on YouTube, an EPSO video about the assessment centre, and it really gives you a great flavour of what it involves from start to finish, every section of the assessment. It shows candidates arriving in the morning, doing the registration, and then doing all of the various types of tests. It's just like a 3 or 4 minute video, so it's something useful that you can watch online, and it explains very well what this involves. So you do your assessment centre in Brussels, and then you're successful in that round. Then your name goes on to a reserve list of successful candidates. I'll just skip over this one. This one is really just explaining the types of skills that are being tested during the assessment centre. So they're the kind of the common skills that a lot of employers will be looking to test, like your ability to prioritise and communicate and to deal with other people and to solve problems. And it says 7+1 because the +1 is leadership potential, so that once you are recruited after a few years, when you begin to climb the ladder, you begin to kind of become more senior, that you have the potential to take on managerial tasks and that you have leadership potential. So let's say you pass the assessment centre phase, then your name goes on to a list. And you see at the bottom there it says 12 months. The list is usually valid for about 1 year, well, for 1 year. And often the period of validity is extended for a second year. But your name will be on this list for a year, and then the aim of the game is to get your name off the list. In other words, to be recruited from the list by one of the institutions. Once the list is made available, all of the institutions can look at the list, and if they need a member of staff, that they'll check the list, and then you might get a phone call inviting you to come to an interview for a specific job. Now, you don't have to take the first job that you're offered. You can do the interview, and then you can find out a bit more about the role, and then decide, you know what, that's not for me. And then what happens? Your name just goes back on the list, and then you might get you'll get a second offer. But just to bear in mind that once you're at this phase of the competition process, the list is usually only valid for 1 year, and the real aim is to get a job and to be recruited. So this kind of explains the way it works. There's the list, then the EU institutions contact you, you're invited for an interview, and then you are recruited. Something to kind of really emphasize is that there's a real emphasis in the institutions on making sure that people aren't stagnant during their careers and that they move around a lot. So even if you are recruited to a specific post, usually within 5 years you could move on to a different position. And you can move around as much as you want during your career. So you could start off working in one area and then move to another area. I have colleagues who've worked in various different policy areas during their careers. I have a colleague who's now working on communication issues, previously was an expert in taxation. So depending on your qualifications and skills, you can work in lots of different areas during your career, and that's actively encouraged by the institutions. There is a huge emphasis in the EU institutions on training and upskilling and learning new skills, and those skills are picked up during work time. So you're encouraged especially to do language training, and you do that training during your working day. And something to point out is that as a minimum requirement, although you need just 2 languages to apply for a competition, in order to be promoted for the first time, you have to acquire a 3rd language. But as I said, there's a huge emphasis on acquiring those skills in the workplace, and there's a big emphasis on training. Something else to kind of mention is that there's a huge variety of opportunities available, because a lot of people think about the EU institutions and think that it's a fairly narrow field of activity, but in fact it's very, very broad, because you have people working in so many different areas, whether it's public relations and communication and press, or humanitarian aid, whether it's working in one of the delegations of the EU abroad, working outside of the EU in a country, overseas. You could work in science, you could work in research, you could work on fighting climate change. It's really very broad. You could work in lots of different areas. So that's just something to emphasize, because sometimes people kind of tend to overlook that. Now, there are some other options for people who might not want to commit to a full-time, permanent job with the EU institutions just yet. So there are some other options available. Just excuse me. Sorry. So let's say you do the competition this year and you're not successful, or let's say you're thinking, okay, I don't know if I want to work in the EU for the rest of my life. Well, you can look at any one of these options. The first one is to work as a contract agent. From time to time, EPSO organises selection procedures for people to work as contract agents. That means that you work on a short-term contract. Usually you get a contract for 3 years or 5 years, and you work alongside the permanent officials and you do very similar work. The disadvantage is that you have a short-term contract and you don't get quite the same level of benefits, but it's a really good way of learning about the EU institutions and various policies. And also, a lot of people who work as contract agents then go on to sit the open competitions to become permanent officials. So it's something to kind of to bear in mind as a good alternative. Normally the process for selection is similar to the open competition, but not quite as rigorous. I mean, the recruitment is, the requirements are the same, in that you have to have 2 languages to apply and you have to be a citizen of the European Union to apply. And you do some types of tests, but it's not quite as arduous as the open competition or as competitive. And usually, once you apply, your name is put on a list of successful candidates, and that's the list is often valid for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then you can be selected. At the moment, there's an open call for contract agents to work in the European Commission, and you can find information about that on the Commission's website. The best thing to do is probably Google European Commission contract agents, and you can apply to work as a contract agent in the European Commission. The call was published, I think in September, and there's no deadline at the moment. They may close it at any point, but you can still apply, and you just you have to register and apply online, and then your name will be added to a database of people who have applied. Then the second option is seconded national experts. These are people who are civil servants in their home country. So Irish, let's say you're an Irish civil servant working in the Department of the Environment in Dublin. You would have the possibility to go to work in the European Commission's Directorate General for Environment in Brussels, and you work there for maybe 3 years. So it's people who are permanent civil servants in their own member state, and then they're seconded to Brussels for a short period of time, for maybe 3 years, and then after that they go back home. So they bring their expertise from their own member state to the EU institution in Brussels and work there. So that's another option. Freelancers, that refers really to people who work as interpreters or translators who do some freelance work. Temporary agents are people with very specific skills, so when the EU institutions need people with very specific skills, and they, they'll advertise positions for temporary staff. Now, something I want to focus on with a little bit more detail are the next, 4 points really. The next 2 I'll take together because they both refer to the European Parliament. This year, in about 5 weeks' time, we're going to have elections for the European Parliament. So on the 23rd of May, the elections are happening here in Ireland. They're happening across the European Union. So we're going to have a new European Parliament elected. So over 700 members of the European Parliament, or MEPs, will be elected. Each of the 700 plus MEPs has an assistant, or usually more than 2 or 3 assistants. These are people who help the members of the European Parliament with various aspects of their work. And this is a very good opportunity for graduates, to work as an assistant to an MEP. Now, the procedure for getting a position as an MEP's assistant is not as, I suppose, clearly set out as for applying for a competition. It's more a matter of contacting MEPs directly and finding out if there are possibilities there. If you're interested in politics, maybe if you're a member of a political party, or if you have any kind of relationship with a European Parliament candidate, it's something that you might be interested in. You can find contact details of all MEPs through the European Parliament's website, and you can find the contact. Well, I mean, you can just look into who's standing in your area as a candidate. You might be interested in helping them with their campaign at the moment, and then if they're elected, you're well positioned to apply and to become an assistant to an MEP. You're not restricted to working for an Irish MEP. There will be 11 Irish MEPs elected this time, but you can work as an assistant to an MEP from any one of the EU member states. And being a native English speaker is often, a good advantage. It's something that's really sought by MEPs from other countries, because they need people who will proofread, their statements and documents and help them to draft statements in English, because a lot of the day-to-day work is done through English. So that is an advantage to Irish people who might want to work for MEPs. You can also work in one of the European Parliament's political groups. So in the European Parliament, MEPs are affiliated to various European political groups. So for example, MEPs who are members of Fine Gael in Ireland are members of the European People's Party in the European Parliament. So there's a number of political groups on various sides of the political spectrum in the European Parliament. You have green groups, you have socialist groups, and so on across the political spectrum. So you could work in one of those political groups, and that's another option in the European Parliament. And again, there will be opportunities coming up after the elections. Then, finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about working as a trainee. All of the EU institutions take on trainees. These are, I suppose Americans call them interns, and in the EU context, we often use the French word stagiaire, people who do a short-term kind of work placement, usually for about 5 months, in one of the EU institutions. Now, I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about the option of doing a stage or a traineeship with the European Commission, but all of the institutions, whether it's the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, or the European Court of Auditors in Luxembourg, or the European Court of Justice, or the European Parliament, they all offer these traineeships. And although the deadlines and the precise requirements vary between the institutions, it's broadly, similar. So just to move down here. So this is the information about applying for a traineeship with the European Commission. So usually the traineeship lasts 5 months. So from March until July, or from October until February. Normally you have to apply very, very far in advance, about 6 or 7 months ahead of time. So if you want to begin a traineeship in March 2015, you would have to put your application in this August. So you do need to kind of plan this ahead of time. You have to be a graduate to apply. You have to have 2 languages, as per, as with all of the opportunities in the institutions, you have to have 2 languages. And there's no age limit, and you can be from any country. You don't have to be an EU citizen. There is a certain number of places reserved for people who are non-EU citizens. And you apply online on the website of the European Commission. But just to emphasise again, these opportunities are available in all of the EU institutions. These requirements are specific to the Commission, but if you go on to the EPSO website, you can find a listing of traineeships across all of the institutions. Now, to scroll back up to the last slide, the last point there is to become a trainee outside the EU institutions. In Brussels, there's a huge number of organisations that are not part of the EU institutional framework, but are involved in campaigning and lobbying the EU institutions. So industry groups, lobby groups, consultancies, law firms, NGOs, there's a huge number of them that are active in Brussels. And a lot of them take on, in fact, I'd say all of them take on trainees, people to work on a usually unpaid basis, to work for a short period of time, and then sometimes you could potentially go on to be recruited by that organisation. So that's another option, to work outside of the EU institutions, but still in the EU sphere. And there's a very good organisation in Dublin. It's an NGO called the European Movement, who are very active in providing information to Irish people about the opportunities available. The European Movement, you can find details of their website on this leaflet, the EU Jobs leaflet. But they have a website called europeanmovement.ie, and there's lots of information available there. They have a grad jobs campaign that really specialises in helping recent graduates find opportunities to work as trainees in the EU sphere, not just in the institutions, but also in Brussels in general, in kind of the EU sphere. They also produce a little booklet called the Green Book, which is a guide to getting an internship in Brussels, and then also how to, kind of a survival guide to working in Brussels, so how to find accommodation, where to go out, where to socialise, basically everything you need to know about living and working in Brussels. And it's really geared to people who want to do a traineeship. So it's called the Green Book, and it's available from the European Movement. So I think I'm almost at the end. Just to scroll down again. So all the websites. Yeah, I've mentioned a lot of websites. As I said at the beginning, EPSO is the one that you really need to remember. And I've brought some leaflets. These two are from EPSO, and you'll find some more information there, as well as the EPSO website. It's eu-careers.eu. Then this one is the EU Jobs leaflet, and I'm going to talk about that now in a little bit more detail. There's lots of organisations in Ireland that are working to promote EU career opportunities. The European Commission representation in Ireland, that's where I work. There's the European Parliament office in Ireland, the European Movement, which I just mentioned. Then you also have the Irish government, specifically the Department of the Taoiseach, and they're also interested in promoting career opportunities in the EU. But we've all come together under one kind of umbrella called the EU Jobs Campaign, and a website has been set up called eujobs.ie that's managed by the Irish government. And the role or the objective of the EU Jobs Campaign is to try to promote career opportunities for Irish people who want to work in the EU institutions. And this leaflet kind of explains all of that and gives you a bit more insight into it. Irish people have traditionally, held very good positions in the EU institutions. At the moment, The most senior official in the European Commission is an Irish woman, Catherine Day, and Irish people are very well represented at the higher managerial posts in the European Commission. Ireland joined the EU in 1973, and the problem is that a lot of the people who started working in the institutions back then and during the 1980s are now beginning to retire, and there are fewer and fewer Irish people working at the lower grades, people who have joined in the last few years. And so if you think about what's going to happen in 15, 20 years' time, that's a problem. It's a problem for the Irish government that there won't be that many Irish people left. And so this is the reason behind this campaign, to try to promote the opportunities that are there and try to get more Irish people applying. So I guess that's part of the reason I'm here today, to try to get you interested in applying. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say. But feel free to take the leaflets, and of course, if anyone has a question, work away, you can ask me. No? Questions? Was there anything that wasn't clear, maybe, or?
Is there an age limit of what you can decide? Do you know?
No, there used to be an age limit just for the internships up until a few years ago. I think there was an age limit of 30, but no, there isn't anymore. No. Sometimes I think I use, because I work in the commission, sometimes you use the jargon a lot, like AD or EPSO, and you forget that it doesn't make any sense to people on the outside. But just if I have, let me know.
About the administration and AD for level.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that it's a bit lower level to work as an administrator, is it?
No. I was saying that there are different categories of staff in the institutions. So broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, there are two main categories: administrator and assistant. And administrator is the kind of the senior grade. So assistants provide support to administrators. Assistants provide secretarial support to administrators. And administrators are responsible for developing EU policies and for a range of tasks, but they're kind of senior officials. So the name is a bit confusing because it sounds like they're doing kind of secretarial tasks, but no, in fact, they're senior officials in the institutions. So the grade system, you begin at AD 5, and then it goes up to AD 16, I think, and you move up the grades during your career. So you begin at 85, but then maybe after 4 years you go up to 86, and so that's the way it works. And there is a competitive salary available. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think it's something around, don't quote me, 4,000 net per month when you begin at 85. And then on top of that, there are some allowances available depending on your personal circumstances, whether you have children, whether you're the main breadwinner in your household, different circumstances, you might get some extra money. But so it's a competitive salary, and there's a lot of benefits, a good emphasis on work-life balance, flexi time, parental leave, lots of training opportunities. But yeah, to answer the question, administrator is the kind of the senior official grade, or the senior official position.
And is there any qualifications specified to apply for it?
No, well, yes. For the 85, for the one where this one, the audit one, yes, you have to have a degree in one of these areas. But for the one where the deadline is tomorrow, the general one, No, you need to have a degree, but in any discipline. It can be in any discipline. And normally, these competitions are published every year, and when you look at the competition notice, you'll see what specific qualifications they're looking for. But this is aimed at people who are university graduates. That's why you can still be a final year student and apply. So you don't necessarily have to have any experience in that area.
I'm not being finicky, but just to be specific in my head, because I'm going to talk to a few people about this. Is that's a pass degree or an honours degree? What do you call it? The HETEC level 7 or HETEC level 5 or level 8?
8. I think it's honours again.
3 years or 4 years?
3 years.
Right.
Sorry, it's 3 years. Minimum 3 years. Yeah.
Right, that's good to know. Just a question about the Irish language, like how within the various EU institutions, what sort of position would the command of the Irish language be needed? Is it just the European Parliament or the European Commission? Like, I'm just for the two languages I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mentioned like the languages element. I suppose my reference to them is really just for the purposes of passing the competition.
Right.
In terms of using those languages, I mean, it really, like, obviously Irish would not be that widely spoken in the institutions, as only, colleagues from one member state would probably use it. So, like, if you were working in a position in an Irish language unit in translation, obviously you'd be working through Irish all the time. Or as an interpreter, you might have Irish as one of your languages. But for this, I mean, it's really just a prerequisite that you have two languages to apply in the first place. That's not to say that you'll end up only working in those languages once you become a permanent member of staff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, well, feel free to take some leaflets, and if you want to take some for your friends as well, you can. Thanks for coming along, and I hope you'll consider applying for one or more of the opportunities mentioned there. And as I said, if you don't want to apply this year, or if you're not ready to apply, or if you think you need to work on your languages, just bear in mind that these competitions come up all the time, and keep an eye on the EPSO website and sign up for the EU jobs mailing list. There's a mailing list that you can subscribe to. You can find information here on the leaflet, and that will kind of keep you informed of all the deadlines and opportunities coming up. And you can also, I mean, there's a huge number of sources of information, and sometimes it can be a bit daunting, but EU Jobs is a good one. Keep an eye on the EPSO website as well, and European Movement is a good mailing list you can subscribe to.
We also, here in the library, we have a jobs board as well for EU jobs, so anything that comes up, we put them up as well. So there's one's there for secretarial jobs, building, we're looking for builders and stuff like that as well, so anything we put them up as well, so you can just drop it to the library as well and check them out.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.